Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Susan Moeller. I work in marketing here at BuzzSumo, and I am with the legendary Brian Dean of Backlinks. We're going to be talking today all about a study of 912 million blog posts, articles, and videos from October 2007 to 2018, specifically looking at what we can learn about content marketing from that data. Now, we're going to start fully in just a second or two, but I want to take a minute to just make sure, first of all, that you can hear me, make sure that you can see our slides, and it's also great if you can see Brian and I because we're all on camera and everything. But of the three, make sure you can hear me and you can see the slides. People always ask, will there be a recording? So yes, there will be a recording, and we'll get that out to you tomorrow. It's usually about a 24-hour turnaround for us. So don't panic if it's not in your inbox within the next hour and a half. It will be there by the end of the day tomorrow. Super. People are telling us that they can see and hear us. Yay. And the other thing is, we would love to take questions. So here's how we're going to do that. If you have a question, the best way is to enter it into the chat box, and we'll pick those up as we go through. Okay, welcome. Let me say that again. Welcome to today's session. My name is Susan Moeller. I work with BuzzSumo, and I am so happy to be here with Brian Dean. You should be able to see him as well. Brian is the founder of Backlinks and really runs a super blog packed with information about how to make your content and SEO work best for you. So Brian, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Susan.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm looking forward to talking about this. Just to give an example, or not to give an example, but to describe where this webinar came from. Brian and I have been working on a project, gosh, it's probably been 5-6 months. Brian wanted to look at some data about content marketing, reviewing the backlinks and social share data that BuzzSumo has. And so we pulled together this study, and he's just published the results on his blog, which you should definitely take a look at. And in the process of working on this, we decided that it would be a good idea to talk through some of the findings. So that's why we're here today, and really looking forward to walking through this with you, Brian.
Hey, look forward to it. And yeah, the study is great to read. The only limitation is, like, I didn't want to go crazy on each one and expand. So in this webinar, we're going to go deep into everything, including more actionable stuff that I didn't really have room for in the study. And then, of course, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So that's important to me. We're going to blast through everything, give you as much actionable stuff as you can, and then have plenty of time for Q&A. So if I'm rambling, Susan, feel free to get me back on track so we can have time for Q&A, because that's important.
Yeah, that sounds great. So we'll also take ramble notices from the crowd if you would like.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So why don't
crowdsource ramble notices would be great.
Exactly. So why don't you kick us off? Let's just start with the data that you found, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So the reason that we titled this "How to Develop Backlinks when the deck is stacked against you," spoiler alert, it's really hard to get links. But in addition to the data, I want to show you some things you can do to get links, because the data shows that it's hard but not impossible, even for small publishers. So a little bit into the methods of how we did this is the 912 million blog posts. You all know that. Why do we choose that number? Well, it kind of chose us because we just looked at BuzzSumo and Henley looked at every post that came out according to BuzzSumo's platform from this 1 year period. Everything they found that's been socially shared, which is pretty much, I wouldn't say all the content that came out during that time, but a good big representative chunk. And it ended up being this massive amount, which is good.
I was so disappointed it wasn't 1 billion, though. I got to tell you.
Next time.
I really wanted 1 billion.
I think it's cooler because it sounds like it's an odd number, which is a little bit better. But yeah, maybe next time we can hit 1 billion. If more content continues to come out, then maybe October 2018 to 2019.
Yeah.
We can hit 1 million. So the first thing that I put in the study for this reason was that this correlation just holds up well with every study. We're not the first person to find this. We're not even the 20th study to find this. There is a correlation with longer content generating more shares. And if you look at the reason why and how you can replicate this beyond just banging out tons of content, is that Jonah Berger, who is a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania who looks at why content goes viral, according to him, a big reason that people share and link to content is a feeling of awe. They had this feeling of awe, like, wow, so much effort went into this. If you've ever seen some content that people have put out, maybe like at waitbutwhy.com or the New York Times, some of their big pieces, you may have had that feeling of like, man, this is crazy. Someone put this out. I'm so like blown away. And it pushes you to share. Who can I share this with? Who can I show this to? And I think that's where long form content comes in, because the days of 400-word blog posts, there's just plenty of those, but it's not that often you come across something that's, let's say, 8,000 words. It just shows a lot of effort went into it, and it means that more people will share and link to it. Of course, it's not a magic bullet. You can't put out 8,000 words of crap and expect people to link to it. But in general, if you put out in-depth stuff, it tends to do better according to this data and from my own experience. Now, social shares was a little bit of a different story, because there was a study that BuzzSumo did with my friend Noah Kagan at the OK Dork blog, and they looked at social shares and content length, and the chart pretty much looked like this. Like, longer got more shares. But according to this study and our data, there seems to be a sweet spot when it comes to social shares and then diminishing returns as you get longer. So it just shows how things change. I think that study was from like we want to say 2015 when it first came out. Noah updated the post a little bit and the date, so it says 2017 on the actual post, but it came out before that. So in 4 years, I mean, things change. Mm-hmm. And this shows that social shares don't necessarily come from longer stuff. This seems to be some sort of sweet spot. Why that is anyone's guess. My take is that for someone to share something, or things can be a little overwhelming for the average Joe to read a 10,000 word post. For someone to link to something, they're in a different category. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But for sharing, I think that 1,000, 2,000 words, you get that awe factor. It's long, it's in-depth. There's a lot of meat there. There's a lot to read and comprehend and study, but not so much that it just overwhelms people. That's my take, although I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on that.
One of my thoughts is that when you create really long form content, so I would look at anything 3,000 to 10,000 words long as really long form, you tend to use more headers. And I wonder, so, when I write something that's long, I'll make sure that I have H2 tags, H3 tags, just because visually it looks better. Do you think that dividing up of text also makes it easier for Google to understand an index?
Yes, definitely. So yeah, Google, especially with the H2, H3 stuff, I think it makes them, Google is doing, one of their priorities right now is to parse up content into little chunks. I don't know if you saw this week, with Chrome, you can now send people a link that sends people to a certain part of a page.
I didn't see that.
Even without you can have the little hash, the little jump links. This is like, you don't need to have that to send people to certain parts. And they're doing the same thing with YouTube videos. Like on some YouTube search results in Google, it's just one section.
Yeah. Wow.
So they're trying to take the world's information, which they've done an amazing job at, and parse it up into little chunks. So the better you can make your content into little chunks, the better they can understand it. Mm-hmm. Plus it helps with readability. Like, it's one of those win-win-win things. So yeah, Susan, I agree that that's really important for SEO, because it helps Google know, okay, this is one section, this is another section, this is another section.
Yeah, I think I'm going to check out that Chrome option to send a piece of the content. I think I still hear a lot from people that maybe their boss or another stakeholder is looking at a really short blog post, 800 words or less. And so if that's something that if you're in that situation, this is good research that you can use to say, no, really, we do need the budget to create longer than 800 word content. You can always test it, and that's one of the things we encourage people to do all the time at BuzzSumo is take this data, use it as a jumping off point, and then test what works with your audience. But I would advocate for using these statistics to begin conversations with other stakeholders.
Definitely. So yeah, I think on to that point, for sure, this kind of data is the only way that you can usually convince those people to try something new, because they're like, I heard once at a conference 8 years ago that 800 words is perfect, and then they're not going to, and you say, no, but look at this, look at that. But if you show them something like this, it's kind of hard to refute, especially, like you said, Susan, it's a good point. Don't say, okay, instead of 800 word posts, we're going to do 3,000. Say, let's try a 3,000 word post and see how it goes. I mean, it's kind of hard to say no to that, in my opinion. So speaking of content and links, one of our findings was that getting links is really hard. So in 2015, BuzzSumo did a study with Moz that was very similar to ours with a smaller sample size. They looked at some different stuff, but a lot of crossover. So we can compare the two somewhat apples to apples. And they found that 75% of the content that comes out has 0 links. And we found that 94% of the content that comes out has 0 links. So assuming the studies were done similarly, which they were, because it's pretty much the same data set from different times, getting links from content is harder than just a couple of years ago. And getting links from multiple websites is like an extremely rare feat. It's like going 4 for 4 in baseball, or 2 goals in soccer for the people that are not from the States. It's really hard to do. It's very rare that this happens, more rare than I thought, and more rare than most people thought. So to that, we just talked about that. And the thing is, getting a link to your page usually isn't enough to rank it for anything. You need more than one. A lot of times, depending on your keyword and your content and all the other 200 ranking factors, you need lots of links. And if only 2.2% of content generates links from multiple websites, that doesn't bode well for just banging out content. You need to be very strategic to be in that 2.2%. Mm-hmm. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I do. I think one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about at BuzzSumo is beginning with that end in mind. So when we're creating content, we don't want to necessarily conceptualize it without thinking through how it's going to be distributed. And so we've begun to really collaborate more heavily with content, doing things like this. I mean, this project with Brian has been going on for several months, but because of it, we think we're going to have a much better opportunity to be in this very narrow band of content that gets more backlinks. So I think that, yeah, it's no longer a great idea to just create great content and look for a link, that we really have to think about that distribution piece all throughout the content creation, not just at the end.
Right. And then if you another way to look at it, I think it's really well said, is that, let's just say, forget the 0.2%. 2% of content gets links from more than one website. In a perfect world, that 2% is the best 2%. Right? Mm-hmm. So you got to ask yourself, how can you be in that best 2%? And as Susan and I have discovered from this project, it's a lot of work. Like, it's not easy to put out something like we put out this week. Like, it's multiple people involved. It's rounds of edits. It's a promotional plan. Like, there's just a lot that goes into being in that 2%. And it's, like you said, it's not just great content, is basically the rest, is a 98%. Bad content is bad content and great content. It's, at the end of the day, it pretty much is the same result now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think too, when you're thinking about these things, you have to think a little bit about how to make the most of a massive content asset like this. So you need to think about all the different content that you could create from it. So far, Brian's published this piece. I loved what you did, Brian, with publishing the PDF of the methodology. We're doing this webinar, which, you're in the middle of content right now. And there's a Facebook video I've done, a LinkedIn video. So having in mind that you can create these big effort pieces, but then also think about how to chunk them out into different smaller pieces is a really solid strategy.
It really is. And one pro tip I'd give is that this stuff is gold for list posts. So if you have a list post and you're like, man, I only have 17 ways to do something and I need 20, a good way to fill in the other 3 is to take data from not even your own stuff, especially from your own stuff, but from other places. And they make great little bullet points if you can expand on them with an example, because then it's unique. So, if you just say, okay, longer content gets more links, we already said that. But if you say, according to BuzzSumo, longer content gets more links, here's an example from my blog, then you just had something different. Or a tip, here's how I outline it to make longer stuff. You get the best of both worlds. So that's one way you get more from a big effort piece that I like to use. So I actually have a list post coming out, and even before we published this, I already had stuff in there like noted, like cite the BuzzSumo study.
Cool. I'll look forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
I'll link to it.
Okay, cool.
Check it off.
Nice. I like that. Free promotion.
Yeah.
Another interesting finding was that, we knew, that social shares aren't evenly distributed, right? Like, obviously every post doesn't get 10 Facebook likes. It doesn't make sense. But you might be surprised at how skewed social shares were to a very, very, very small percentage of content. So I called them power posts, but they're basically the top tier of content. So if you look at all the social shares in BuzzSumo's index, which I can't even imagine, if it's 912 million posts, I can't even imagine how many social shares you have.
It's 5 billion.
Billions.
Yeah. And
okay.
I think we're going to hit 6 billion sometime in the next 6 months. We're going to throw a party.
Okay.
6 billion
That's just,
post
think
party.
about that. That's insane.
Yeah.
So of all the shares for all those posts, 75% of them come from 1% of the content. So if getting links is hard, getting lots of shares might be even harder, because they all tend to be skewed towards this very, very small percentage of power posts. So yeah, it's even harder to get. It's hard to get links, and it's also hard to get social shares unless you're in this top tier. It seems to be like you're either in this tier with content or you're nothing.
Yeah, we've been thinking a little bit about how to build that kind of authority. And I think that's the other thing that content marketers have to wrestle with, is that this strategy is, it's a long game. And so I think that there are product elements involved. If you're writing a blog for a company, the product itself needs to be stellar. And then it also takes time to build authority. So time is a huge factor in this.
Yeah, that's a good point. The authority part is something you guys talk about a lot, and I don't hear a lot of other people talk about it on the blog. Like Steve talks about that, Steve Racing. That just like that's a big part of it. And it's kind of a catch-22, because you need authority to get this type of content, but to get the authority, you need to put out this type of content. Or if your product is just like you said, Susie, if your product's crazy, like if you're MailChimp or something, you have kind of built-in authority despite what your content is. Like you could put out 5 tips for whatever mediocre stuff and probably still do okay. But for most mere mortals, content is going to be your secret to developing this authority, which to be in this, top subset of power posts, it's 0.1%. You need to put out crazy stuff. There's no two ways about it. And on a consistent basis. And it takes time for years. I put out good stuff on my blog for a long time. I didn't have too many readers. It was like flat, slightly increased, and then all of a sudden it went up. So yeah, there's a big part of just like sticking to it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, knowing these kinds of things, if you're just beginning, then I would focus your time on these big rock. I think that's how Jason Miller from LinkedIn describes them, or in the Hero Hub hygiene model, the hero level content. I would focus there and really build those, as opposed to lots of little content. That would be my guess. And building a case for that internally, I think that this data can be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the quality over quantity thing. This just adds more fuel to that fire, because you can see that so few posts get shared and linked to that it takes quality. Quantity is not going to do it anymore.
Yeah, the other thing that, the upside of this data, because one thing I've been thinking about a little bit as I've been reading your posts throughout the week, is that I not everyone is a professional content marketer. And so I think that the audience for your post is probably already at a point where they're going to be able to create better content. So I was thinking about how these kinds of statistics can also be used if you've created content and maybe it has 50 shares and you have someone on your team who's like, well, this piece about Beyonce got 150,000 shares. I think you can use this data to say, hey, look, we're still in the top 2% of content. So let the data defend what you do while you're building your case for even better content too.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the biggest takeaways for me, and I think for a lot of people, was that we didn't find correlation between social shares and backlinks. And to put that in simpler terms, content that gets shared a lot doesn't necessarily get linked to, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So, which surprised a lot of people, because you think, okay, if something gets shared a lot, more eyeballs get on it, therefore someone will link to it. If you get it in front of 1,000 people, maybe someone will link to it. And we found that that's not the case. And I think the reason for that is that there's a big difference between people that share and people that link. It's a totally different group of people. That's one of the reasons. There's probably a lot of reasons. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Susan, but that's my take, is that there's a group that ran fishing called the Linkerati, who are like kind of this like not a secret society, but kind of a small percentage of people that run blogs and websites. And they're not the same people that are on Facebook and Twitter. Usually there's not always crossover. So if you create something that people love on social, that's your mom. You know what I mean? But if you create something, unless your mom runs a website, mine doesn't. But
your mom and the Linkerati. This is a question we all need to get to the bottom of.
Yeah, exactly. But if you create something that appeals to this Linkerati group, you're more likely to get links, but it might not get shared. So yeah, that's my take on why this correlation doesn't exist. I've always kind of known this in the back of my mind, always focused on this Linkerati group with my content, but I'd like to hear your thoughts too, Susan. Maybe there's other factors involved that I haven't thought of.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to explore. I want to join the Linkerati, so we'll talk more about that later. But I also think you have to think about the business purpose of your content. And I think that some content is more oriented toward just raising your domain authority, oriented toward your search goals. And I think other content can be designed for social sharing. And they really are two different things. I think you talk later on about the different kinds of content that get shares and the kinds of content that get backlinks. And so I think always having your audience in mind, knowing what your audience prefers, and knowing then what your goal with a particular piece of content is. If it's brand awareness and expanding into other audiences, a social post may be a post that's geared towards social sharing might be just what you need, understanding from the beginning that it's not going to get as many backlinks. So I think we have to be really clear, again, in our planning for content, who the audience is, what the purpose is, and then how we're going to measure it. Because you don't want to measure your content that's geared for social sharing based on backlinks, nor do you want to measure your backlink generating content based on social shares.
Right. That's a really good point. And it reminds me, Moz a couple of years ago tried to come up with like a meta number to describe if content did well or not. And it was this mishmash of like traffic and comments and shares and links, and they just kind of abandoned it. It's kind of impossible. Like there's no way to look at one number and say this content succeeded, because it depends on why it was created in the first place.
Yeah. We have a measurement at BuzzSumo, and if the audience, I would love anyone who's tested it. You can always email me at Susan@BuzzSumo or at Susan C. Moeller on Twitter. We've created an evergreen score, and it's not intended to compare instantly viral content with long-term backlink generating, but it is intended to show content that for a period of time continues to get backlinks and continues to get social shares. So it's looking at the set of content that is amplified in either of those two ways over time. Like I said, it's not intended to show everything about a piece of content, but it does give you a place to begin if you're looking to create something that's going to have a long shelf life. So I'd love any thoughts from people who've tried that, if it's accomplishing anything for them or not, because I think we have to think really carefully about combining those two numbers and measuring them, and being real clear on what the purposes of the content is.
Exactly. So, like we said, the goal for most people, in my experience, I might be biased here, most people create content to rank in Google at the end of the day. Like, it's very rare you hear of a content marketer who's like, I just want to create good stuff and hope people see it and builds authority and all that stuff. Most people at the end of the day want it to get shared, but the primary goal is for it to rank in Google. So if your goal is to do that, you can't create stuff that's going to do well. You can create stuff that's going to do well on social, but that can't be your goal. You know what I mean? So that you got to look for links. And in my experience, it's creating content for this Linkerati group, which is basically, it sounds a fancy way of saying bloggers and journalists, people that work at websites. That's basically the story there.
Interesting.
But if you do want to get social shares, we found that long headlines are correlated with increased social sharing. So what we did is put them into different headline links into different buckets and looked at how their average shares were. And there was a correlation between longer when it came to word count and character count and social sharing. I think this is just like, you can pack more information into a headline. It's something there is going to stick out and grab you. That's my theory. Maybe Susan, you have one.
Yeah, no, I think it's related to how much content's out there. And if you can get the sense of a post in the headline, you can oftentimes just share it. I think there are studies that look at people share based on headlines alone. They don't even necessarily check to see if there's an article. Don't do that at home. We want to be better than that, but I think that's part of it too.
Sure. So yeah, this is again with character count, and like anything, Susan had that caveat in the beginning. This is a jumping off point. Like I just shared with Susan, there was like a kind of a rebuttal about the study of point by point why he didn't agree with it, some guy. And part of the flaw in his reasoning was that we're saying that you should create long headlines and that you should do exactly this. And it's not really that. It's not prescriptive in any way. It's more just, here's the data. This is some stuff to test. And a lot of people ask me like, oh, I'm doing short headlines and they're working well. Should I start doing long headlines now? It's like, well, you could test it, but if things are working for you, I wouldn't necessarily just switch over because some study said to do it. But this is informative because maybe you never even consider this. And this shows that there's some data behind this long headline stuff.
Yeah, and I think you haven't tested it until you've tried both. If short headlines are working for you, the question is, could you get a little bit more if you did a long headline?
Exactly.
So test both and see.
Exactly. So this is more of a nugget than like a huge takeaway that should change how you approach content marketing for the rest of your life. It's that we found that question headlines get 23% more shares than non-question headlines. I have a little theory in the post about why this is, and it's basically, it adds that element of curiosity because you want to give stuff away in your headline, but you also want to leave something to be desired. And with a question, it's kind of inherently that because they want to find out the answer.
I agree. I think that's a good reason that could be happening.
Yeah, I don't know what else. There's nothing magical about the question mark itself. So I think it's more to do with like maybe your headline doesn't even need probably the question mark. You can just ask the question, but that's a way to find those headlines. So how do you create good headlines using a lot of stuff we looked at? Well, CoSchedule has a headline analyzer that's kind of famous now. It's really good. And it analyzes it based on a bunch of stuff. It is focused on social sharing, so not necessarily SEO, but if that's your goal, then this is something to look at. And it's just good to put it in there and kind of see like other approaches you could take. Because it's kind of hard when you write a headline. I'm sure you've experienced this, Susan. Like you think, okay, this is good. I don't exactly know what's missing. Like you just have a feeling it's not ideal. I've run into this a lot. I pop it in here sometimes or other headline analyzers, and it just gives me an idea of what it can do, rather than just staring at a screen and hoping that Eureka hits, which it never does. So that's why I like this headline analyzer. I
think it's Ann Handley that says write 25 first and then go to this.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's pretty hardcore. I'm not saying that's wrong.
No,
that's legit. Like if you're crazy about headlines, which you should be, according to our research, there's a big difference between, headlines that work and headlines that don't. It can be the difference maker. So this was another surprising one, that if you compared all the social shares by day of the week, there isn't much difference. It was only about 1% difference, 1.5% difference between the most difference. So like Sunday to Friday had the most difference, but it was only 1.5%. So the takeaway here is this is something you can experiment with. But if you read a couple of years ago that like Monday is the best day to publish, it might be time to test something out and see what works best for your audience. And actually, BuzzSumo makes it super easy because you can see different content that's already out there and see when people share it. In addition to your own testing for your sub audience, you can see in general what days shares tend to come from. So in my case, I'm in B2B. Susan, you're in the same boat. Social shares tend to come Monday through Friday because people take the weekend off. But it might be different if you're in fitness or knitting or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Kitchen remodeling. A lot of those on Saturday.
I guess you're doing that. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. Well, most people are searching for this stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Retirement is a Sunday and Friday, I think, which is interesting. And then
because they're dreading going back. They're like, that week was sucked. I need to retire. And then Sunday's like, I have to go to work tomorrow. I wish I was retired right now.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
There's another one that has surprised me recently. I think it was finance personal finance topics. And those really tick up on Friday afternoon. And I was talking with someone in that industry and they weren't at all surprised by that. They said, it's because people kind of toward the end of the day on Friday, they've done their heavy work and they can kind of sit back at their desk and start to read and share some things.
Interesting. So, yeah. Also, people get paid on Friday a lot of times. So on Friday afternoon. So they had the check and they're like, that sucked. I put all that work in. All I got was this. Like, what can I do? That's how I used to feel when I had a job. So
yeah,
I was probably searching for stuff on Friday afternoons. That's just another theory.
Yeah.
So this is a quick video of kind of what we're talking about. Maybe you could walk us through that because Susan. Oh my God, look at the difference here.
Yeah. So what you can do in the content analyzer in BuzzSumo is you enter a blog address. We give you all kinds of stuff, but this is blog at HubSpot. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see that most of their engagement comes with content that's published on Thursday. So, and there's nothing being shared over the week or over the weekend, sorry. One thing to be careful of is if you're analyzing like the BuzzSumo blog, we've only published 23 posts this year. So you have to have a blog address that has enough content to make this valid. Blog at HubSpot's a good one. They've published more than 1,000 articles. Ours, we get a lot of shares on Tuesday and Wednesday because that's when we post. So right. Just a caveat with that.
Okay, that's cool. I like this little animated GIF in the presentation. So in terms of format, this was really interesting to me, especially when you see the next slide or the next finding, was that these two content formats tended to do much better than some others. So when it comes to shares, and this actually goes into a little bit why shares and links don't have this big intersection. Part of it is the type of content that gets shared and linked to. Mm-hmm. List posts get shared. Like this is as old as the internet itself, basically. List posts do well, and then BuzzFeed just took it to another level a couple years ago. And why posts were also interesting because in B2B, I see a lot of those. Like why Elon Musk, doesn't eat breakfast or something, and then like 10 million people share it and read it. Why, whatever. Like it has that element of curiosity. It's basically a question post that doesn't always have a question mark, but it's a question post or what post, like what X can teach you about Y or what blah, blah. That's the top end. The bottom end's just interesting to me because video doesn't get shared that much. And I'm not surprised by that as someone that is active on YouTube because people just don't share video. It's too much to share. It's like 10-minute video, sharing it. Within the platform, it's very shareable, but not really outside where BuzzSumo picks the stuff up. So that makes sense to me. And then infographics, they're mostly crap. And then how-to posts are, they're more instructive. They're more stuff that's going to get linked to. They're not that like, oh, wow, this is crazy. It's hard to create a how-to post. It's like kind of scratches this controversial itch or has some sort of angle. It's so practical. It makes sense that it wouldn't get shared that much. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's me.
I agree. Totally. I'm with you
Okay,
100%.
good. All right. So,
And I'm going to let you like just blast through the next
okay,
bits because
okay,
we do
sure.
have some questions coming on.
Okay, sure. So on the other hand, when it comes to links, you notice that infographics were dead last when it comes to shares. When it comes to links, they were a third, almost second. Why is that? Well, like I said, most infographics are terrible, but the good ones are good to link to. They're like a resource. They're either like instructive or they have data or some hook that gets people to link. And look at the bottom, like a how-to post and a list post, they tend to get shared, not really great for links. You know what I mean? How-to posts are okay for links, but list posts went from first to last. And that just goes to show that these things are a lot of times very different. Mm-hmm. And then again, if you compare like, referring domains to average social shares, you can see that there's not much overlap, not much consistency. It's all over the place. It really depends on the format. So B2B stuff, I get this all the time. I'm in B2B, how does this apply to me? Mm-hmm. Doesn't work for me, blah, blah, blah. Get this constantly, and it rubs me the wrong way because I'm in B2B. I'm like this post is about what I did, and you're saying it won't work in B2B. Anyway, that's a tangent for another time. The point is that when it comes to content, number of shares, and I'm sure it's the same with number of links, B2C gets more. The data set combined B2B and B2C, so it's not just B2C. But look at the difference. You can see, it's crazy. Mm-hmm. So anyway, B2C content gets shared a lot more. And it just makes sense. It's just more B2C. It's just B2C content appeals to more people. You know what I mean? It appeals to people that are in B2B and everyone else. So, if you have a post about the best email service provider, that only appeals to like 0.01% of the people. But if it's, how to get in shape for the summer, that's pretty much everybody. So it makes sense that this B2C stuff will get a lot more shares, 10 times more shares. But the distribution of this stuff was exactly the same. So the number on B2C is higher, but if you just look at how it gets distributed, it's the same. It's towards this small number of power posts when it comes to links, when it comes to getting multiple links, and when it comes to shares. And when you compare B2C and B2B, it's pretty much the same in terms of distribution. So why is it so hard? Why are these numbers true? Like, why is only 2% of links in B2C, 2% of sites get links in B2C and 3% in B2B? A big part of it is just the number of posts. So I looked at WordPress's data of how many posts get published on their platform, and you could see this difference in a 2-year period. And if you look like 5 years ago, it's even crazier. Like, it's just a huge increase in the amount of content that's come out. It's harder to stand out. It's harder for people to even notice the content in the first place. A lot of people call this content shock. I don't know who coined that.
Oh, Mark Schaefer.
Mark Schaefer. Okay, There you go. Content marketing guy. It's very smart. And it was perfect description of what it is. It's just basically like there's, only so much attention is here and content is here. It's gone above what the attention span is for everybody. So do you want to talk through this part? Because you know more of the...
Oh, yeah. So, we're talking about how hard it is to get links. And I thought that it would be good to point out that if you are using BuzzSumo monitoring for a brand, we do give you a link building opportunity that originally was recommended by Syed Balki of WordPress for Beginners. And so what we do is with each of the brand mentions, we tell you the domain authority of the site that mentioned you, and then we give you a link or no link indicator. So in this example, this piece by Top Rank Blog mentioned BuzzSumo, domain authority 68, and there is a link. The one below it, there's no link, domain authority 83. So what Syed suggested, and we've experimented with it seems very effective, is we'll just reach out to the people who mentioned us and ask if they would mind to add a link to our content. Now, I do use a couple of different criteria. I wouldn't suggest necessarily reaching out to all of them. Make sure it's a positive mention. And then, we took a month's worth of these at one point and got 200 new backlinks.
Wow.
So yeah, it's
crazy.
Yeah. Now the clients that we have who do this, they suggest following up very quickly. So, check your mentions on a daily or weekly basis and follow up with them. And the way that I've done it is I just look for an email address for the poster, the publisher, and then if I can't find that, even sending an @ message on Twitter, not a direct message, but an @ message. That's the strategy.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. I'm in charge of slides.
That's all right.
I was like, and go ahead.
Yeah, and next slide.
Totally forgot it was me. So yeah, and again, this is distribution in B2B. You saw this way earlier in the presentation, that there are basically power posts that get most of the shares, and a distribution is almost identical in B2B. Mm-hmm. You can see the comparison right here. Yeah. Numbers are a little bit different, but the idea is the same. A very, very small number of power posts are getting most of the shares. The rest are largely ignored.
Looks like there might be a slight advantage to being B2B here, because it's 2% and 0.5. I guess I'm grasping at a straw, but
well, if you look at it's not. It's a good point actually. Like if you look at B2B if you look at the posts that get 50% of the shares, it's actually 5 times more in B2B. Yeah. It's still a tiny number. That's what I was saying. But you're right. It's in actual numbers, you have a much better chance, probably because it's just less content in that space. Yeah, a lot less.
I love B2B. I got to tell you, someone asked me the other day what I like to write. I'm like, anything but fiction.
Oh, so like, don't have to, the B2B, unless you're doing like Michael Crichton novels, there's no B2B fiction.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. I think
we can do Q&A. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to just scroll back up to the top here. And
can you take the first question, Susan? I have to get a water refill.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Okay. I'll be right back.
Let's see. So true. A 10-word, this is from, I'm not sure, I can't see the name. A 10-word post can be overwhelming, but the way we've seen you do it breaks it down into digestible, actionable chunks. Yeah, I think that was addressed to Brian, and for sure, breaking that down is a really good way both to help machine readers and human readers. Now let's see, here's a question. Any tips for a newspaper? It's hard to get authority for original content when all news portals have to write about the same news. Really super, super interesting question. My first thought, well, I guess I would need to know a little bit about the news, the type of news that you're creating. My thought about generating shares for a newspaper would be to try and involve the people that you are writing about. I would say news sources do have an opportunity to build community. If you're in a local news setting, going very hyper-local and focusing on people, especially for building social engagement. I think it would be interesting to think about how community builds authority. We talked about how product could build authority, but I think community can also build authority. Brian, I'm looking at a question that asks about tips for building authority as a newspaper. And I suggested really leveraging the power of the community around the news and maybe focusing on the people that you're writing on. They would then be able to use their muscle to distribute your content.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's tough. Like I bet the same power law of small percentage of shares and stuff go to the big news sites. But if you have that community, like you target a certain group or speak to a certain group and then really involve them, that can help. And also another thing that people don't do, I've seen a lot of news sites do, is turn off commenting, which obviously hurts the community aspect. It's a pain to manage for sure. But at the end of the day, it's important. It's a must, in my opinion, for building that community.
That's a good point. So someone's asking, where's the Chrome option to send a piece of content? The fragment in URL is helpful. This seems even better. Do you have that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to. I just saw it yesterday. It was getting shared on Twitter.
Okay.
I haven't actually tested it, but the idea is that you can. I don't exactly know how. It's basically you kind of create a jump link, I think, that you can share. Yeah. In Chrome, even if the page doesn't have it built in.
We'll see if we can find it, and if I can, I'll add it before the recording goes out. So here's one. Is it better to have a couple of links from sites with low domain authority or no link at all? Where's the line between several links from low quality sites and 1 or 2 from high quality domain authority sites?
There's really no line. So in general, the first question, definitely better to have a couple links than none. Unless they're from spammy sites. But if they're from like low quality sites, they're better than nothing. in my experience. In terms of like what's better, I do think it's usually better to get 2 authority links than 10 links from smaller sites. There's a lot of variables there. A ton of it depends, like if the site's relevant to you, if the link is in the content or in the footer, what's the anchor text. But all other things being equal, I prefer the links from authority sites. I find that they move the rankings up more than multiple links from other places. Ideally, you get both. Plus, when you get the big links, a lot of times the small links follow because those sites follow those other blogs and they can find you through there.
That's good. Yeah, this one is from Jake, who asks, is there a best time of day to publish content for both social and the web? I don't think we had that data in what we pulled from BuzzSumo. I don't think we have a time stamp. Do you remember?
No, we just looked at the day of the week.
Yeah.
But I'd imagine it's the similar situation as long as you don't publish like 2 a.m, because if you look long-term, which is what we looked at more or less, it's not like the day it comes out. Like over months and years, content doesn't succeed or fail based on the time it came out or the day it came out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's more about what it is, the format, the goal, how well it fits, promotion, all that stuff. So as long as you publish when your people are awake, that's best. But even if you publish in the middle of the night, when they woke up and they see it, when they wake up, it's still new to them. Like it doesn't matter that it came out 5 or 6 hours ago. So I think in general, I personally publish at 11 a.m. Eastern because I've tested it and I find that does best. That's when kind of like, because I'm B2B so that people are at work. So that's like the States is at work and the East Coast, West Coast are just getting in. Europe, they're still there because 4 p.m. in Western Europe, very Western Europe, England and Portugal and stuff like that. And and even Asia, it's not that late. So it's not the middle of the night. So you get kind of that, but for you, if you're in B2C and people are at work, they're probably not reading about the paleo diet. That might be where you want to push it to 5 p.m. Eastern or, something like that when people are checking that sort of thing. Or like we saw with the personal finance, Friday afternoons might be that money time for you that doesn't even make sense for most other sites, but you'd only know that by testing.
Yeah, I did put a link in the chat box to the Ultimate Guide to Facebook Engagement that BuzzSumo published. For Facebook specifically, it's 9 to 11 p.m. So that's one thing to think about. And that's looking at posts within Facebook. So later in the day is better for Facebook engagements if you're posting within that social platform. The other thing you could try is, I know that MailChimp recommends a time that we publish. If you have no other inclination, that might be something. If you're using an email service provider and they recommend sending at a certain time, you could publish maybe the day before at that time. Although I do think that changes. Sometimes they recommend one time, sometimes another. Okay, so here's a long question. What is your take on producing a massive amount of good content, i.e. a professional review of hundreds of restaurants, for example, instead of one piece of long-form content? We want to have full coverage of our entire area, and that has been our approach at SmokyMountains.com. The design of this content is to legitimately help travelers and win them as a long-term brand user. We have content to attract links, but that is separate. Thoughts?
I think what you're doing is right. I think I actually know these guys from the Smoky Mountains. Did I meet you at MozCon back in like 2015? You can put in the chat if I'm confusing you guys with a competitor maybe in the Smoky Mountains. But I just remember that.
Yep, they did meet you.
Oh, okay, yeah, I remember that. How you doing? So to answer your question, I think what you're doing is right. Like I would look at that kind of thing, reviews and stuff. It is content, but I wouldn't look at it as content marketing. So what I would do is do exactly what you're doing. Have those really good reviews of everything, and then have a couple power posts that are really good, designed just to get links. Your target audience may have never see them. It's just for this Linkerati group. Get links to it and then funnel the authority to those individual pages. That's the e-commerce approach that I don't do clients work anymore, but when I did, that's one of the first things I did with e-commerce sites is to say, okay, no one's going to link to your product pages. No one's going to link to your category pages, but you can. You just need some authority to throw around. So that's why I'd recommend that they create one piece of amazing content designed for this Linkerati group, forget shares, just get links to it and then funnel that authority strategically to those pages. It'll also increase your overall domain authority, which can help all your pages rank. But it helps a lot more if you use internal linking to link to the ones that are important to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful, Brian. Yeah, I would suggest maybe even leveraging some of those reviews. If you have why this restaurant review matters or why a reviewer would rank you high or low. I don't know, just brainstorming. Let's see. Reese says, when do you know that you've gotten the maximum output from getting links? Do we need a little more information on that one?
No, I think it's a good question.
Okay.
The answer is, like, if you've cast your net of link opportunities and reached out to everybody, you probably hit like 80% of them. You can also do all sorts of stuff like start in a different way. Like, say you're doing resource page link building and you're just looking for resource pages, and that way you could use broken link building. So you could take a site and put it into a tool like Ahrefs, look at all the broken links and start from there. Look at all the people that are linking to these broken links and reach out to them and try these different approaches. But in general, I find that you find a lot of the same opportunities over and over and over again. So if the content is like massively important to you and you need to get lots of links to it, I would just keep turning over stones. But for the most part, I do like outreach, I get links, I kind of go with the easy opportunities, and then I move on to the next thing.
That's good. Thanks. So Eric is asking, is there a case to be made for writing 3 1,000-word posts for a total of 6.5 backlinks versus 1 3,000 or longer word post for 4 backlinks? This sounds like mysterious link math. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not good at math. I should throw that out there before I answer this question. So I only understood about half of that, but I'm going to answer it anyway. So I would say, I don't know. I would actually say maybe the 3,000 words are better. But for SEO, if you're just looking at links, obviously 6 links is better than 4. I think that's what it was. But if you can get 3 pieces of content that are really good and they're all linked to, you can get 3 pieces of content to rank instead of 1. There's so many variables, it's hard to answer because it depends on like the keywords you're targeting. If those 3 are just kind of okay, they're never going to rank anyway, even if they have links, versus the one that's amazing might start to rank even though it doesn't have that many links. There's like a million variables, but if your goal is links, I prefer to go with that quality over quantity approach and just try to get as many links as you can.
I'll play devil's advocate and say both. Create the 3,000-word piece first, get those links, and then if you've written something 3,000 words long, you have a lot of knowledge about it, then leverage that into an additional 3 smaller posts that are going to be useful, tangentially related to the other, and get a total of 10.5 backlinks.
Man, that's a lot of links.
That's a lot of links.
That's almost 11. That's better than 10, but not quite 11.
Yeah,
but I think you're right, actually. If you can do different angles on it, that's ideal. I only had either or. I didn't know both. That was kind of cheating.
Well, yeah.
But I guess talking about 10.5 links anyway.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're worried about the math bits and everything, we did have some help on the analysis, so you can trust the numbers. They're not just not just the non-math people. So Donna says, all of this sounds like bad news for small business owners who don't have time or money to produce well-researched and promoted content. What advice do you have for them?
It is kind of bad news, to be honest. I mean, it's not good news. Let's put it that way. But there's a guy I follow named Derek Halpern, and he has an expression that he says, be the exception. And it's kind of like there's 2 ways to look at it. Like, say you have bad genes, and for whatever, I don't want to use a morbid thing like cancer, but say you have bad genes for bad eyesight. Yeah. Like, you can try to be the exception and like not look at a screen all day or wear UV blocking stuff. Like, there are things you can always do. That said, that's not very practical. My recommendation is to focus on quality and not quantity. So a lot of times people that don't have the resources and time to put into content, they're like, how can I produce all this stuff? And now it has to be good too. And I get that. But part of the thing is you don't have to publish that much. Like, if you run a small business, you're probably not competing with the huge sites like the Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world. A couple pieces of content can make all the difference. Like a good example is waitbutwhy.com. That guy came out of nowhere, and he just published a huge mega post like once a quarter or something like that, and he blew up. He put quality over quantity to the extreme. So my recommendation would be like, just if you have a publishing schedule, ditch it and just go, unless it's working for you, but otherwise ditch it and try saying, okay, instead of 5 posts over the course of a month, we're going to put out 1 post over the course of 2 months and just do the best thing we possibly can, have multiple people work on it. That's going to increase your odds of getting into that power post category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I hate to use the word small in this context, and here's why. So if I say small business owners have small audiences, that sort of sounds like unimportant. So let's go with small business owners just to have a more niche audience, super deluxe and special. And so I put a link in the chat box to this Facebook page. It's for Coffee Hub Xenia. So it's in Xenia, Ohio. I think the population is like less than 20,000, and they have so much engagement in their Facebook audience. So they are a local business. They're small, and they really only need the engaged audience of people who are going to drive to Xenia to buy a coffee. So they're not necessarily needing a huge audience. So that's one thought. Focus on the niche that you need and recognize that if you get 1 share in an important niche, that's the BuzzFeed equivalent of 100,000 shares or whatever. And then I also think, work with other people. Brian, someone's asking, is it wait but why that you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Tim Urban.
Okay, let me put wait but why is it.com.
Yep.
Yeah, so check. I always put wait but shy. That's my answer to Facebook Live. No, just kidding. Yeah, so check that out too for a look at someone who is really doing quarterly content that meets these things. Okay, another question. I'm curious about the value of links from places like online Chamber of Commerce directories. Did they have any value?
Oh, definitely. So if you're a local business, that's usually one of the best places to get links because they're easy. Like you just have to send an email basically. And you can get links beyond the directory. Like you can give it, a guy I know is in the UK and they have chambers of commerce there as well. And he gives talks about like websites and things that like a lot of little shops don't know about. So, and they get links because they have a page about, this, I don't know if he wants me to share it, but like his name and how his website, and they link to him. And they're usually very generous with links because they're a community, like they're a chamber of commerce. They're all tied together. So yeah, that directory chamber of commerce stuff definitely has value, and you can take it to the next level if you want to by being more involved.
Nice. So we have 3 minutes left. I propose a speed round of questions related to links for you, Brian. Are you in?
Let's go. Let's do it.
Okay. And I'll say this. In 100 words or less, kindly explain the difference between do follow and follow links.
So they're actually the same thing. So that was easy.
Well done. Okay. And let's see. Here we go. Do you have the most success with broken link building?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. What's the best way to ask for links? Is email outreaching still the main form of outreach?
Yes.
Do pop-up banners prevent your content from ranking in Google?
On mobile, they can. So I turn it off on mobile. If it's full screen, that's it depends, but to give a lightning round answer, like if your pop-up's on desktop, you can almost do anything, but if it's on mobile, Google's more picky. So you have to be more specific about how they look. Google has a lot of examples. If you Google interstitial pop-up penalty, you'll see like their own guidelines on what can hurt your rankings.
What's a minimum domain authority I should be looking for on a site I want backlinks from?
I actually don't look at domain authority for that much anymore. I used to all the time, and I find that it's just a waste of time. And the reason is the relevancy of the site is more important. So if it's related to you and it only has a domain authority of 15, a lot of times that link is more powerful than a domain authority 50 from an unrelated site. Also, you don't know what that site's going to be. So if it's domain authority 10 and it's BuzzFeed on day one, it could be huge, or the New York, whatever, like a big authority site. So I would get a link kind of wherever I can get it. A lot of times at domain authority 10, the site blows up. All of a sudden it's a domain authority 70. And you got the link window is relatively easy. So I don't really recommend like going crazy with that. If you want to filter out like absolute low end, you can do like 5 or 10.
Interesting. Okay. Last question in the lightning round. Should we be requesting backlinks to our .com or to our content? So main site or content?
I see what you mean. Probably to your content, unless your homepage, like you have a thing that's really incredible. Like BuzzSumo, I imagine most of the links go to the homepage because the tool is so useful. So people talk more about the tool than the content. And even if BuzzSumo became like, it almost doesn't matter what the blog was like because the tool is so useful. People will link to that more often. I bet it's the same with more like Airbnb or Uber or whatever. Like if the product is so useful, people link to the homepage. But if you don't have that, you definitely want to ask people to link to your content because you're more likely to get links that way.
Cool. Hey, we're out of time, and there are still some other questions we didn't get to. I'd recommend checking out Brian's blog. He has tons of really deep content there that I think you'll find some answers to these questions. In fact, I tried to screen ones that I thought maybe you could find content there. Brian, thanks so much. Really appreciate the time that you spent in looking at this question and interacting with this whole concept of what we can learn from a year's worth of content. So thanks for taking the time to do that.
My pleasure, Susan.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have had this chat. Everyone, have a great day. We'll get the recording out to you soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.